the way that third world countries are ran is more about a relationship base. So relationships are very important, but here in America is different. They are important, but you also have to follow the system.
Today we have Mr. Isaac Mendoza, a partner at Fifth City Co., which happens to be the production company behind the making of my podcast. I have to thank you, Isaac, for making this experience that I thought I could only dream about into reality. This project that many may not believe is me pushing through my fears and definitely outside my comfort zone. Being in front of the camera and public speaking was not something I really ever did or imagined doing. So I had to push through those fears with a bigger picture of hoping that if even one of my episodes can help one person feel seen and heard with some of the stories we shared, then it's all been worth it. As Isaac and his partner Whitney know, it is quite harder than it looks. I mean, we really should upload a whole episode of just all the bloopers that have taken place. Interesting enough, Isaac himself is an immigrant who came to the U.S. at a young age. And not only did I think of sharing his immigrant journey, but thought what a great way to get the perspective of life from the other side of the invisible border. Hi, Isaac. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Nooshin. I'm excited about this one.
Yes. I mean, you're now on the other side of the camera.
I am.
How's that
Can you
feel?
notice? It's definitely different for sure.
So you're the professional now, and I'm going to learn from you. So
Yeah.
Isaac, so where are you from?
So I'm currently from Mexico City. I was
Okay.
born in Mexico City, about an hour and a half away from Mexico City. And my parents migrated to a town called Pachuca. It's about probably 30 minutes added to the hour and a half, so probably 2
Okay.
hours.
Okay. So at one point, did you so you immigrated to the U.S. Did your family come with you? Did you come together? How did you?
Yeah.
What is your immigrant journey here to the U.S.?
Yeah, for sure. So my parents, at the age of 9, my dad is a pastor. He's a pastor, religious pastor from a church locally here in Atlanta.
Okay.
So at the age of 9, they gave him an opportunity because of the organization grew too quickly. They had a missionary in Mexico.
Okay.
And that church grew too quickly for a good thing, for as for growth. And they offered him a job here, so he accepted it. Obviously, I didn't have any say or anything on the
Yes.
decision. So I came along at the age of 9, and I was currently going into 5th grade at the age of 9.
How was that transition for you? Like with language-wise, with the school system, how different was that?
Yeah, it was very different because I didn't know English at all. So 5th grade, I pretty much, I had in Mexico, they had these cards. Soccer is a very
Yes.
popular sport.
Yes.
So they had these cards that they would print out for the bread. Once you purchased bread, there were some soccer cards. So I brought those with me. All that to say, in 5th grade, I pretty much, the whole entire year, I spent my entire year of school playing with the cards during class. So I didn't know English through the whole entire 5th grade.
So you were just distracting yourself or learning English through these cards?
I was not at all because the 5th grade to me, I didn't. How do I explain that? It was a very tough grade.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot of adapting. So
Yeah.
the language at all. Obviously, you come and your parents have a subculture at
Yes,
home, and then
yes.
you go into school, and then you have another culture that you're trying to balance yourself out. So 5th grade, it was a very tough year for me for 5th grade.
Were your parents empathetic of the culture outside their little bubble, their house bubble?
It was very interesting because my parents, back then, we didn't have this sort of help psychological for kids and things like that because it wasn't very common.
Yeah.
So it was not that they were empathetic, it's just that you had to make a change and everybody along had to sort of be along the change with that.
Okay. What I see from the outside perspective is like, so the Hispanic community, it's like a little enclave, you know,
Yeah.
you can live in an area and you can just see that you can get by without having to learn English. You know, there'll be certain streets that have all the restaurants, the grocery stores and so forth.
Yeah.
You know, the Persians, a lot of them migrate to LA and like I could see people who don't even know English just thriving, living there because there's everybody around them is like speaks Farsi, speaks Persian. So did you live within those and did it help or make it harder to assimilate?
So I think it was very hard to assimilate. My family did not live around sort of the Hispanic community, just because the church that they brought him was American, and it was an American church. So we had to sort of get used to the culture, not only the Hispanic community, but the American community as well. So yeah, we did not live around the Hispanic community, but we were going to church with Hispanic people, with obviously our people. So.
And could you sense as a child how that assimilation for your parents was? Because, they had the whole responsibility of bringing two kids with them when they're trying to figure it out themselves.
I don't know how they did it. I think it's very hard. If I had kids, it's definitely, I don't know how I would do it.
Really?
Yeah, honestly, in that sense. Because I feel that I would first travel myself and maybe work for a year or 2 years if that had happened to be me.
Yeah.
But then I would do the psychological help. But back then it wasn't, I don't know how they did it, honestly, Nooshin.
It's crazy,
yeah,
isn't it? Like,
yeah.
every time I think back of my dad's, like, he just picked up himself, left the family. There wasn't even, like, phones. Like, you had to write by letter or snail mail, go by a plane, like, to see if you're alive. To suddenly go to another country and figure out, like, with the technology that we have to think about moving, say, to Europe, I don't know where I would start.
Yeah.
And that's just me. If I were to bring my kids along and all of that and tend to their needs, it's overwhelming. It's too much.
And I think there's a responsibility with having a family, right?
Yes.
I feel that if I did it now, meaning without family, it's easier. But having a family is definitely much harder. Obviously, they're very brave and courageous. And I think in the third world countries, you're used to that. That becomes sort of a second nature to be brave and courageous because there's no other outlet.
Yeah.
But then when you have something established here in America, I think that sort of braveness and courageous gets sort of lost.
Yes.
And that kind of.
Would they ever consider moving back to Mexico City?
I believe that they still call that home.
Okay. After how many years now?
After 22 years.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I wonder why. I guess, I don't know. I guess we've had previous guests that say home is, and who's moved around, is home is wherever you are. And I would consider, I guess, home for me is where my kids are, where like your family is. But a lot of immigrants, their home is, back where they were born.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. So I always wonder if that mentally blocks them from trying to adapt to accept the change, or do they accept the change, to accept living here?
I think one of the episodes that you had your son, which it reminded me, he talked about layers. And I think it's very, I think you start to find how people adapt quickly to change throughout those layers, because obviously you can have those connections, but then you get deep down and those layers start to pop out and how they connect and how they adapt. So my parents, I think, you sort of saw the raw in them, how they adapted to things, to something new. They didn't speak the language. They didn't know how the system, because it's obviously a new system too. The way that third world countries are ran is more about a relationship base. So relationships are very important, but here in America is different. They are important, but you also have to follow the system.
Yes.
And in third world countries, you don't have to follow the system. You can sort of like, if you know someone, you can sort of skip the line.
Yes.
But here you still, in a sense, obviously, you still have 90% have to follow the system in a sense.
And also, I guess, the concept of village, like in Mexico, I'm sure, I don't know, like the Middle East, there's a village, there's family, there's people of support. Here they come and there's none of that.
Yeah.
So that takes away a lot of your surroundings is kind of emptied out suddenly.
And you know what I figured out too is, I think this is something that I like about America and United States, is that in our village, you talked about villages, you have to sort of follow. There's a sort of a ladder, right, of who's the oldest, the eldest. Here in America, it's still a little bit about that, but you also, when talking about innovation, when there's new ideas, you don't have to follow the ladder of, well, that might be a bad idea or a good idea. You just do it.
Okay.
And I feel that in Mexico at least, sometimes people doubt themselves. Of doing things because, my dad said this, my grandfather said this, the elder, And here it's not like it's.
A lot of people are in your business there.
Yeah, exactly. Even with family too.
Yeah.
People get a saying in families.
Oh yes.
So I feel here in America the mentality changes because of that, in the sense of, it's not. I understand. I respect my parents, but it's not what they or decide or think. It's really how the air comes, or how the day goes by.
It kind of breaks when you come to the society. It kind of breaks that cycle of like, okay, you just have to do what's expected of you. You have to do, what you're told to do, or everyone's opinion. Here, you have the right to just swerve left and just take a different path.
Yeah.
It allows that break.
Yeah,
that
and
continuation.
I love the way that we think here, because when I go down to Mexico, sometimes the family questions things, how things are done, but it always works out because we've seen it here that you can do it different ways. There's not just one way of doing it. So you can do it different ways, and that opens their minds a little bit too.
Would you ever, it's been a while since you've been here, but you go back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
Could you ever live back in Mexico?
I could.
You could?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I could, and I think I would do it differently. In a sense of, let's say if I had to start a career there, or I had to do things there because of how the mentality of America. I think.
Can you take that American mentality and make it work there?
I think you could, Nooshin. Here's the reason why. Two things that I learned from the Hispanic culture. Relationships are very important.
Yes.
And here, taking from Mexico to here, it's very useful, because you learn how to love people. I think the Mexican community loves people authentically, without any expectation. Obviously, those things help out throughout their careers, but sometimes they don't have nothing to offer. So the only thing that they have to offer is a relationship.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it's like a relationship currency.
Yeah.
And what I would take from here to over there is more of the career mentality of, it's not just one simple way of doing it. You can do it differently. And your way might be the way that you like it, but my way can also get us there potentially faster or at the same pace. So I think taking advantage of those two things and going and living in Mexico, I could definitely do it.
Is the opportunity there, like the infrastructure there, to take your American way and do it in Mexico?
I think the opportunity is there. We see it now. I don't know if you've been following the news lately that in Mexico they're investing a lot more money and resources because they're trying to move the logistics sort of way of materialist from sort of Asia to now Mexico and all those other parts. Okay. So the infrastructure is coming, and we can see it. I went about a year and a half ago, and the mentality of the 70s of how the dad and the mom started work is becoming there now. So like the mom, the dad are starting to go to work, and the kids are
dual income.
Yeah, so that's happening currently. So we're starting to see, from what I love history. What I saw is that those two things are starting to happen, but the infrastructure is starting to get there, and I think that they're starting to see that shift how America went through the 70s and 80s. But I believe that it could be there, the infrastructure.
What's the biggest misconception do you think Americans have of Mexico?
That's a good question. The biggest misconceptions Americans have of Mexico. Obviously, we hear about cartels.
Yes.
We hear about all the violence. We hear about sort of that people are not educated. We hear about all those things. I believe that they're there, but because of the news is focuses only on that. We don't focus on the good part, sort of like the relationship currency that we could be using. Sort of really authentically learning how to love someone. And down the road, obviously, that could always help you, but focusing on the person rather than what they can bring to the table. I think
the media loves to depict that, they pinpoint the smallest bad thing and exploit it so much. Like, for example, when we think of if I think of Mexico, the things that come in, it's like, Cancun, cartels, and migrants at the border. So it's all kind of except the Cancun part, it's the negative stuff, Or like in Iran, they always, the news will pinpoint the one little corner of the city where all the women are wearing the black veil, which majority are not. You see hair, people exposing their hair and everything, vibrant city. And our currency is the hospitality. And anyone that would go there will just say they had the best hospitality because we love people as well. We love welcoming people to our homes. But the media doesn't want to show that side of us.
Sure.
So there's a lot of you could take it with a grain of salt what the media is showing until you go in there and see the life and the people.
And I think you bring a good point, because I think culture is really about, back to your son's point, layers. Really figuring out the person and figuring out what their values and what they don't value. And every culture has different things that you can always learn from it and take it with you. And just in my sense, when I do business, I learn new things that people love to do. And everybody in different kind of cultures loves business differently or does business differently.
There's a whole, I remember when I was in grad school for my master's there was a whole like area of work of business, cultural business, how to even just greet other people from other countries. It was a whole like another like certification that you could get in. It was really interesting. I thought it was quite fun.
I've heard several things from the Asians to the Europeans to the Americans, how things are ran differently and doing business. It's definitely different.
It's a different culture that one needs to learn. But when you hear these negative connotations, does it like just frustrate you? Do you just wish that people be like, no, this is not what it's like? You know, I remember like when I was in high school or middle school back in the day, people think, oh, do you guys have airplanes? Do you guys just all ride camels? And you're just like, no, it's like, it's so saddening. How do you feel, or how do you kind of change that mindset or bring exposure to the positive of it?
So 2 things that I found out as well. TikTok around the world has become a big thing.
Okay.
Here in America, it's talked about because it's 2 potential countries, right, at the top of the food chain. But in Mexico, sort of TikTok has been this window to everything. So in Mexico, the misconceptions from America, they're starting to be streamlined, meaning very popular, very mainstream. That's what I mean. From here in America, we don't see much of the content from Mexico because most of the content creators are Americans or they're Europeans.
Yeah.
So in Mexico, there are a lot of issues that we don't hear in America about. But most of the things that are talked about here in America are sort of like we hear about the border, right? I think it's a big issue. Cartels are a big issue.
Okay. Is that something you really have to worry about in daily life, or is it you just don't go in the wrong place and deal with the wrong people? I
think cartels are on the top, a sort of government. You have two difference of mafias.
Yes.
So I'm gonna
break it down to us. Yes.
So you have the government mafia, which is obviously, because we just talked about, there is no system that is controlled. There's no real system. Because relationships are very important. So you have the government mafia and you have the cartel mafia.
Okay. Interesting.
So I had this argument with my mom because my mom thinks that Mexico will be communist, and I told her it won't be because the cartel won't allow it to be.
Okay.
Because cartels are very capitalistic sort of organizations. So you have those 2 kinds of organizations, the government and the cartels. So if you go for a daily person in Mexico, there won't be much of an issue unless either you start to evolve, your career starts to pick up, or you start to earn a little bit more. Or you're at the bottom and you're poor, that is your only outlet. So in order to get either provide or whatnot. So though if you're in the middle, there's really not much of that going on in your daily life. It's more about you become sort of an extra of what's happening either on your daily life if the cartel is in town or the government. So the middle is what the people who suffer the most. Middle income to a little bit high income, who are suffering because of those 2 organizations.
They're just trying to tap off on what you're making, your earnings.
Exactly.
So does it hinder people to want to invest in themselves?
That it hinders people, but it also, and that's the reason why people migrate to America.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I wanted to go into that. So what would these some of the, like, I know a lot of, like, I'm not sure about Mexico, but a lot of like Central Americas, there was issues of gangs, like people are being threatened and killed, that mothers are sending their children to cross the border because otherwise if they stay, they'll be killed. And they're traveling by themselves, these innocent kids. Like, as a mom, I would have to, when people don't have that sympathy for the migrants, I have to think like what it takes for a mom to let go of her child to go to another country by themselves. It has to be really bad for a mother to do that. So for the Mexicans, like, what are some of the reasons that they're trying to come to the U.S.?
So like we just talked about, 2 of the reasons were that either you're wanting your career to grow, and there's obviously a top or a roof that you can't pass that, and or you're at the bottom of the food chain and you just can't do much other than migrate in order to earn more money. The problem that we see not only in Mexico but throughout Central America that you mentioned is because Mexico throughout probably Argentina is affected by the economy. Because of the governments are very corrupt, and we also have the cartels running alongside with the governments. So that is the main reason why people migrate for a better life. Probably 95% are good people. 5% is what obviously the media focuses on.
Of course.
But the 95% want a change and want something different because of what they're used to.
Yes.
But that is the main reason why people migrate. And most of the time, people just migrate to come and work for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then go back because they're sending money monthly to their families. And because the dollar's stronger, it's obviously going to be better for them just to come and work and then have that sort of sending money back to their families.
We hear about, like, I think I've once mentioned to you how I would love to go visit Mexico City. It's all of a sudden become this up and coming place that you hear about. Everyone's going. The food seems amazing. So would you recommend, recommend me going by myself, or is it best still to go with a tour? How safe is it for one to go visit?
I think the best thing to start off with, go with a tour if it's your first time. But then once you sort of been through it a couple of times, you could probably go by yourself. The main thing is obviously stay on the tourist side of things, because in Mexico, just like any other part of the world, if they know you're a tourist, they'll probably take advantage of you or things like that. But Mexico is very safe for tourists. Okay. It's really more focusing, and I mean, you'll see that the military has been more involved, and now because of the investment in Mexico, they're starting to put more of a safety issue on things. But yeah, it's safe in Mexico for tourism. For tourism,
so like Cancun's and the Cabos, When you hear that once in a blue moon kind of thing going on, I don't think it has to do with the tourists. It's just something else.
Yeah, and it was very bad in 2010 because I think all the other thing is there was a fight for power. So different cartels were all obviously fighting for different reasons. But 2010 throughout 2014, the Mexican government had a treaty with the cartels, and one of the presidents broke that treaty. Oh, okay. So then that's when
they don't explain that part.
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't explain that part. What would Mexicans' view of America or Americans be?
That's a great question. I've heard that,
or the misconceptions.
Yeah. Well, I believe that Americans are viewed as sometimes they can be viewed as what's the word? Selfish. Sort of, they can be viewed as they're not used to sort of a prime example, right? Like most of Americans don't know how food throughout the food chain is brought to our tables. Like we just go and purchase bread, but we don't know the whole entire way that is done, because Mexico is one of for vegetables. They produce a lot of vegetables. Most of the people know how things are sort of made or planted. So that could be one of the things.
Better appreciation.
Yeah, a better appreciation for life. I think a better appreciation for smaller things. Sometimes our lifestyle here in America, we don't appreciate the small things.
Yes, no.
Like sometimes we don't appreciate that the light comes on, and, or the water.
Yes.
So like in Mexico, people appreciate that they get water on Mondays or whatever that day. So there's appreciation for little things, which we could all definitely be helped from.
I think like with the pandemic, I think it was just eye-opening, the panic. Like I was actually in Iran, right? And I had to leave with 8 hours notice because the borders were closing. Because after China, it hit Iran.
You were there.
And I was there and I had to come out. But when I was told that the borders were closing, I had to leave, that I was still in the streets of Tehran just wandering, doing my last minute souvenir shopping. Everyone's all calm. Everyone's okay, because that country's been through a lot.
Yeah.
I arrived here, and next thing I know, there's a shortage, this craziness of shortage of like toilet paper and water. And I'm like, what is going on? It hasn't even hit the U.S. Yeah. This country is not used to any sort of like difficulties. The panic mode is just insane. Like even in Atlanta, when it snows a little bit, those shelves are empty. Where other countries, they've been like hit with so many things that they just kind of take it with stride and they still live on, you know? So it's just interesting how here, they take for granted, where in other countries, like, you know, they've been through it and they keep going. And
I think back to the thing of like relationships, I think America had that foundation, but I think throughout time we sort of, because we're evolving quickly, we sort of lose those smaller things through the change. Kind of when you talk about change all the time, I think we lose those little things, or maybe change the way the process makes us change. We lose those things throughout when the process is being made.
And then one thing going back about the funniest story was the misconception of, I guess, or the conception. I don't want to say misconception. The conception of Americans viewed by the Mexicans. Sure. I was in San Diego last summer, and then I'm driving in San Diego. Everyone knows it's beautiful. But it's one of the most expensive places in California. And so my Uber driver was a Tesla. And so I go to the guy, it's like, wow, so how do people afford to live here? That's my curiosity.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, the secret code is TJ. I was like, what is TJ? He's like, Tijuana. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, everybody, majority Americans, will cross the border, live in Tijuana, which is, cheaper, and then cross over to work in the U.S. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of smart. Yeah. And Tijuana is known to be a kind of dangerous city. So so after that, I actually had a tour set up to go visit Tijuana. It's like kind of like, it seemed like a party place, but everyone says one of the dangerous cities. Sure. So you had to be careful of. And then I told the guy that I was like, well, why don't they just move? Like, what's the perception of the Mexicans of, the Americans? He's like, yeah, a lot of Mexicans, they don't want to move to the U.S. because they're scared to put their kids in the school system here because of guns. I'm like, oh my God, when the Mexicans are scared to bring their kids to the U.S. because of the gun issue, that's pretty embarrassing.
And that's not only in Mexico, throughout South America too. You hear that really they're afraid of the school systems here.
Wow.
And the other thing that surprised me is that, and I'm not sure if it's good or bad. I don't have the right maybe information or whatnot, but they're all amazed that everybody can buy a gun or that for that. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting how that misconception or conception of school shootings, it's a big thing for.
Isn't that crazy? You're living with the cartels, but then you guys are scared to put your kids in schools. Like at least it's weird that there's some morals within the cartel not to attack schools.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, because when you have both organizations, sort of there's some sort of peace until you want to make your career better or your lifestyle better, or you're at the bottom and obviously you don't know they don't have the right information, schooling, education, all of that. So the only way is through the cartels.
So if you were to go back with your new American business model and ideas, would you not be scared that you'll be signaling the cartels?
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, in a perfect world, obviously I wouldn't. But there are some rules or laws that you definitely have to follow for sure.
Well, I really appreciate it. So how has your experience been here? Like your family now, are they just accepting of now life in America? And
it's definitely different because I have a niece and I have a nephew. So it's kind of like
Are they here in the U.S. or Mexico?
Yeah, they're here and they're American. They're my brother. I have a brother. So my brother is married and he has a niece and a nephew, a son and a daughter. But it's surreal because I was never, like I mentioned, I wasn't part of the decision making when moving to a new country. So
there's a lot of things we were part of.
So in that process, it's kind of living on kind of the third point of view, seeing yourself throughout this time and how time flies by here in America too. It's crazy because when you go to Mexico, it's much, I don't know if it's slower or the way the lifestyle, they
enjoy life. I feel like everywhere in the world, they enjoy life as well as a balance. You know, maybe they don't have that cap of the capitalism, make all that you can make, but there's that family time. There's the connections you said, the value of relationships. Yeah. I feel like everywhere in the world creates that and accepts that, but sadly here I feel like it's very isolated, it's very individualistic. Yeah, and in like that living here and throughout the change, I think there's been a lot of a change in my family. I think parents too are not used to sort of the psychological factor. Even throughout most Hispanic parents, they just say this is the way that it is because they have that thought process of their countries or their origin. So for a second generation is definitely different from what their parents like. Did you see your brother kind of break that cycle with his kids? I have seen it, and as well, and my parents are very open-minded. But when we were growing up, they were not. They were not. They're not the same people. Grandparents are not the same parents. So like seeing them as grandparents is definitely they're totally different than seeing them as parents. When we were growing up. You know, like you said, there's not a handbook for parents, so you have to kind of give them some leeway. They did the best they could, and now they realize, okay, it's not a big deal to let go the rope a little bit on the kids. And so now they kind of let the second generation assimilate because
Yeah.
they realize that is their home.
And your son was saying it kind of like he Google fact checks
Yes.
you. So like imagine if we would have been able to do our parents that
my
way.
God.
That would have been.
They'd be like, throw the phone
different.
against the walls. Like,
Yeah.
I know what I'm saying.
Could you imagine that? I mean, it would have been.
Oh my gosh.
A totally different way.
Just to doubt what they say. That
Yeah.
was like, you could question anything. It's definitely different times.
Yeah.
They're not, the second generation is definitely not of the same cloth that we were born
Yeah.
in.
Oh yeah. No, and kind of having those sort of like, I think our parents sort of broke the path, or whenever our
Yeah.
parents who migrated here, they broke a chain, right?
Yes.
But then learning how for the second generation not to get sort of don't plateau, continue to grow.
Yes.
But I've heard several.
Accept the change, kind of go with the
Yeah,
flow.
I've heard several stats that says like the third generation is where sort of things start to forget, and any kind of things, business and also in just when they families migrate and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like how to continue to grow without being stagnant or plateauing
Yeah,
in your family.
interesting.
So it's kind of
It's a fine balance because you want to
Yeah.
keep that tradition and the culture and a sense of community.
yeah.
But
You lose the tradition, and I think also when the grandparents pass away,
Yes.
different things you lose different
oh
things,
yes, 'cause
right?
they're like
that's
usually, especially the ones that came here. They're the foundation that brought everything
Yeah.
together. Like it was that glue
Yeah.
to your connection to the other country.
Yeah.
And when they go, you're just like kind of like, oh shoot. It
yeah,
gets
like
more
now in my
diluted.
own kind of thing, and I have
Yeah.
to create my own.
I have to
thing,
create my
kind
own
of-
tradition,
yeah.
my own like method of maintaining it.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really
So
cool.
very-
Thank you so much, Isaac.
you,
It's fun
Nooshin.
to have you on this side of the camera.
I know.
Got to know you a little bit more. It's been
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nooshin.